My name is Sylvia Kennerly. I'm 63. I've spent most of my life quietly keeping the edges of my family intact, smoothing over problems, paying bills no one asked me to, and carrying burdens that were never acknowledged. I've always been the one who gives, the one who stays, the one who folds her own needs into the background. That evening, I was standing at the stove stirring a small pot of butternut squash soup, the kind Caleb used to request when he had a cold. The kitchen smelled of roasted vegetables and warm spices, comforting in its routine, a quiet anchor in my otherwise restless life. My phone buzzed on the counter. I thought perhaps it was a reminder, a late greeting, anything ordinary. Instead, I unlocked the screen and froze. One message blinked back at me. Don't call or come over. We're done. No punctuation. No explanation. Just that. My chest tightened, but I did not cry. Not. My hands hovered over the counter for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, I typed, "Got it." I hit send. The stove hissed as I turned the burner off, and a silence settled over the room, too quiet. Not empty, but weighted, thick with the recognition of a pattern I had known all along, the invisibility I had endured for decades. The way my sacrifices went unseen, unmentioned, unthanked. I wiped the counter with the cloth I had used for years, folded it neatly, and set it aside. The photo of Caleb at his graduation stared up at me from the kitchen table. I picked it up, not for comfort, but to remember what he used to look like when he still saw me. I moved to the cabinet, retrieved the folder labeled Assets, Personal, and tucked it under my arm. Everything else I left untouched. Locks checked, cat fed, small notes left for neighbors. I stepped back and inhaled deeply. The night stretched before me like a quiet promise. And for the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of something new resolve. I finished wiping the countertops, folding the dish towels with precision, and rinsing the few dishes left from dinner. The kitchen smelled faintly of rosemary and baked squash. Comforting and familiar, yet tonight it felt different, charged with the quiet weight of decisions. My hands moved on their own, methodical and steady, as if the rhythm of these chores could anchor me before the next step. From the hall closet, I retrieved the old overnight bag I had packed for hospital stays years ago, the one with frayed straps and a faint scent of cedar from my sister's house. I set it on the bed and began filling it deliberately 2 sets of clothes, my medications, and the thick flannel cardigan my sister had knitted before she passed. I folded it carefully, pressing it against my chest for a brief moment, feeling the warmth and the memory stitched into every fiber. I placed a photograph of Caleb on top, the one from his graduation. His smile, bright and open, reminded me of a time when he still looked at me with recognition, when my presence mattered in ways beyond practicality. I did not pack for comfort, nor out of hope, only to carry the necessary pieces of myself forward. Next, I grabbed the folder labeled Assets, Personal from the cabinet. It contained the records of accounts I had managed, the payments I had made quietly over the years. I tucked it securely into the bag. Everything else in the house, from the stacked mail to the carefully cataloged cookbooks, I left untouched. Standing for a moment, bag in hand, I surveyed the space around me. The silence pressed gently against my ears, a companion to my resolve. Every motion of packing, every item chosen, was deliberate. A silent assertion, this was my life, and I was reclaiming it. I zipped the bag closed and laid it beside the door, ready to step into the night and the path I had chosen for myself. I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser and retrieved a small wooden box, worn at the edges, filled with letters, cards, and trinkets from years past. Each item held a memory of a moment I had quietly supported. Moments no one had thanked me for, but that shaped the life of my son. I placed the box carefully into the bag, alongside the folder of financial documents, records of bills I had paid, deposits for school, hospital visits, and birthday parties. As I packed, memories surfaced in fragments. The late nights balancing overtime shifts with school drop-offs, the soccer practices I barely attended but never missed paying for, the hospital stay when Caleb was sick, where I had sat in the waiting room clutching his hand, counting every minute until he was well again, every small act of care, each invisible sacrifice, rose like smoke around me, heavy but familiar. I took the graduation photograph I had left on the counter and slipped it into the bag once more, careful to place it where I could see it later. His bright smile reminded me of the boy who had once looked at me with admiration. The moments before responsibility had replaced recognition. I folded the flannel cardigan my sister had knitted, pressing it against the bag, feeling the soft texture warm my hands. The bag was nearly full, each item deliberate, a collection of a life lived largely unseen. I checked that the folder was secure, zipped the compartments closed, and lifted the bag with steady hands. It was heavy with memory. Yes, but lighter with purpose. Every object I carried was chosen consciously, a statement that I mattered, even if no one else had acknowledged it. I placed the bag by the door, its presence a quiet declaration. Tonight, I would leave not in anger, not in haste, but in calm, resolute motion. This was more than packing. It was reclaiming the years of care, the invisible labor, the love I had given without expectation. I inhaled, letting the weight of it settle, ready for the next step on the path I had chosen for myself. I eased the car onto the highway, headlights cutting through the thickening dusk. The road out of Asheville stretched ahead, winding past familiar hills and darkened forests, each mile pulling me further from the life I had quietly carried for decades. My hands rested firmly on the wheel, knuckles pale, but my mind drifted over the memories that had shaped me. James's death had split my world in two when Caleb was only 5. I remembered the late-night calls, the hospital corridors that smelled of antiseptic and fear, and the nights I slept in chairs beside him because someone had to be there. My body had learned the rhythm of exhaustion, the pulse of responsibility that never rested. College deposits, unpaid bills, grocery runs, soccer practices I could barely attend. I had managed it all without complaint, ensuring that Caleb never felt the weight of what I carried. Birthdays, holidays, small victories of daily life, all funded, all smoothed over, all invisible. Each act of care had gone unnoticed. Yet now, sitting behind the wheel, the accumulation of years whispered insistently it was time to step away. The mountains loomed closer as darkness settled over the valley. The curves of the road mirrored the twists and turns of my own life, a series of obligations and sacrifices that had never been acknowledged. Even the wind brushing against the car seemed to echo the solitude I had carried inside, the quiet persistence that had allowed me to survive, to provide, and to love without expectation. For the first time in years, the road ahead was mine alone. I did not glance back. Each mile reinforced what I had already decided leaving was inevitable, necessary, and quietly just. The past would remain a part of me, stitched into every line of my face, every ache in my hands, every beat of my heart. But from here on, I would drive toward a life where my presence was chosen, not assumed. The night deepened as I drove, and memories began to settle around me like the mist clinging to the mountain roads. I thought of missed calls that were never returned, the text messages I had sent that went unanswered for days, sometimes weeks. The holidays, once full of laughter and shared meals, had dwindled to brief visits where I sat quietly with Caleb's family, feeling like a guest in my own life. Maya's voice came to mind, the casual dismissals I had brushed off for years. "She's kind of a downer," she had said once, innocently enough, as if my very presence were an inconvenience. I had smiled and nodded, swallowing the sting, because keeping peace had always been easier than confrontation. Even when I brought flowers or baked goods, my efforts were received politely but with an air of obligation, not gratitude. I remembered one Thanksgiving when I arrived with a casserole, only to find the driveway empty. They had gone to Maya's parents without a word, and my phone had remained silent all day. I tried to tell myself they were busy, that life simply moved on. But the pattern had been there for years. My contributions mattered only when they served some practical purpose. My presence was tolerated when it was useful, ignored when it was not. Birthday parties, small victories, simple acts of care I had given freely, without complaint. Yet I realized that love had become conditional in their eyes, tied to service, not sentiment. My role had shifted from mother to invisible caretaker, a provider whose presence was assumed, taken for granted, and rarely acknowledged. As the miles passed beneath the tires, the clarity came in quiet, heavy waves. I understood why leaving was no longer a choice, but an inevitability. The subtle neglect, the tiny exclusions, the polite dismissals they had accumulated into a truth I could no longer ignore. My love had always been unconditional. Theirs had only acknowledged me when it benefited them. Tonight, I drove into the darkness, leaving behind the weight of years spent being seen only for what I did, not who I was. For the first time, my presence would matter only on my terms. By the time the sun began to rise, I had parked at the small branch of our local bank. The lobby was empty, except for the tellers moving quietly behind glass partitions. I took a deep breath and approached the counter, my bag resting on the floor beside me. The folder labeled Assets. Personal was clutched under my arm, filled with years of meticulously tracked bills, mortgage statements, and account ledgers. I asked to access every joint account I held with Caleb and Maya, one by one. I canceled automatic payments, froze credit lines, and ensured that the mortgages and insurance on the Asheville property were under my exclusive control. The teller asked if I wanted to notify the joint holders. I shook my head. Let them discover it on their own, I thought. I answered security questions, signed forms, and felt the strange mixture of relief and weight that comes with wielding authority long ignored. From there, I walked 2 blocks to the attorney's office, where I had made a long-forgotten appointment months ago. I signed a notarized letter formally withdrawing from all legal and financial responsibilities tied to Caleb and Maya. Copies were placed in my folder, others tucked into a safe deposit box I controlled. Every action was deliberate, each step a reclamation of control over the life I had given away quietly. I drove back home, the cabin still hours ahead, and called the mortgage company to confirm the Asheville property was fully under my management. Then I paused, listening to the hum of the engine, feeling the quiet ripple of consequences I had set in motion. For years, I had been the silent keeper of their comfort, the unnoticed safety net. Today, I had stepped away. As I settled into the car for the long drive toward the Smoky Mountains, I realized the extent of my freedom. The bills they relied on would bounce. Tuition payments would be missed. Alarms and services would lapse. I was not doing this to punish them. This was not revenge. It was recognition of my own worth. A boundary drawn firmly and finally. For the first time in decades, I felt the power and clarity that came from being needed on my own terms. Not by default. The road stretched ahead, empty and inviting, carrying me toward solitude, peace, and the life I had chosen for myself. The road narrowed as I drove deeper into the Smoky Mountains, the trees pressing close on either side, their branches whispering in the wind. The air grew colder, carrying the scent of pine and rain. Each mile pulled me farther from Asheville, the city, the house, the weight of a life I had kept running for everyone but myself. When I turned onto the gravel path leading to my Aunt Florence's cabin, the last light of day flickered through the trees. The cabin appeared between the pines, weathered but standing strong, as though it had been waiting for me all along. I stepped out of the car, my breath fogging in the mountain air. The silence felt vast, but not empty. Inside, the floors creaked in familiar rhythm. I set my bag down, coaxed a fire to life, and watched as the first sparks leapt toward the chimney. The warmth spread slowly through the small space. I filled the kettle and brewed tea. The motions simple and grounding, each one reclaiming a small piece of peace I hadn't felt in years. The flames cast soft light across the worn furniture and wooden walls. It felt like being inside a heartbeat, steady, alive, safe. My phone stayed off, tucked deep in the drawer beside the bed. The world outside could turn without me for a while. For the first time in decades, there was no noise, no list, no one calling my name. The weight I had carried, every bill, every expectation, every unacknowledged kindness, seemed to ease its grip. I sat by the window, tea cupped between my hands, and watched the forest darken under 1,000 quiet stars. Here, I was no one's safety net, no one's shadow. Here, I was simply Sylvia, breathing freely, existing without apology. The silence was not absence, it was the sound of beginning again. It took only a few days for the quiet I had claimed to ripple outward. Caleb's voice came through the phone, tense and unsteady. When he finally called, "Mom, are you there? Why isn't the payment posted?" His words trembled with confusion and panic. I listened silently, sipping tea by the cabin fire, letting the weight of years of invisible labor settle around him now that it was absent. The alarms in the Asheville house went unanswered. Security notifications blinked on his phone, the lights in the system indicating neglect. Tuition payments for Harper's school were late, triggering calls from the administration. The grocery deliveries Caleb had assumed would arrive without question had been canceled. Each small failure, each missed obligation, carved its way into the calm I had carried so long, now spilling over into their lives. I had watched them manage the household for years, smoothing over mistakes they barely recognized. Now, the safety net had vanished, and they were left grappling with the consequences. My presence had always been assumed, a constant invisible thread holding the fabric of their comfort together. I had never demanded acknowledgement or thanks, only the quiet permission to care. But as panic set in, as they scrambled to understand why nothing functioned as expected, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Even in their confusion, the truth became undeniable. The hours I had spent balancing bills, scheduling repairs, and covering tuition were suddenly visible in their absence. The life they had assumed was effortless now revealed its dependency on me. The subtle exclusions, the missed cues, the tiny injustices I had endured, they all came into sharp relief. For the first time, they saw the weight I had carried silently, and the emptiness left when it was gone. I stayed in the cabin, letting the quiet unfold around me. I did not interfere, did not answer calls beyond listening. The chaos was theirs to experience, the realization theirs alone to bear. And as the night deepened over the Smoky Mountains, I sipped my tea and watched the stars reflect a world where I was finally unbound, where the consequences of my absence spoke louder than words ever could. I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a quiet corner near the window where the soft afternoon light spilled across the table. The smell of roasted coffee beans filled the air, mingling with the faint hum of conversation, and I felt the familiar steadiness settle into my chest. I had packed the folder carefully, Every sheet of paper a record of decades of invisible work mortgage payments, insurance bills, tuition for Harper, grocery lists, even small gifts I had quietly provided. Caleb and Maya arrived a few minutes later, tense, eyes darting as if searching for the familiar presence they had always taken for granted. I did not rise to greet them, did not offer a smile. Instead, I opened the folder and placed it on the table between us. The edges of the pages rattled slightly in the light breeze from the door. A quiet announcement of what was to come. I kept track of everything. I said softly, deliberately, every mortgage, every tuition payment, every bill I handled, so you could function without concern. For years, I did this quietly, without comment, without recognition. My voice remained even, steady, but it carried the weight of decades. Caleb glanced at the folder, hesitation etched across his features. Maya's hands fidgeted in her lap. They had assumed these tasks were minor, invisible, but now the extent was undeniable. I did not soften my tone, did not ask for forgiveness. I am withdrawing from these responsibilities. I continued, I will no longer cover what is yours to manage. My presence is no longer assumed. My labor is no longer invisible. They exchanged a glance, the unspoken recognition of reality settling between them. I could see the panic and disbelief flicker in their eyes, the first moments of understanding how entirely reliant they had been. For years, my love had been silent, generous, and unseen. Today, it was measured, deliberate, and finally acknowledged. I closed the folder gently and leaned back. The conversation did not require argument or pleading. The truth was visible, undeniable, and it demanded recognition on its own terms. For the first time in decades, I felt my boundaries respected not because they were thanked, but because they could not be ignored. The weight I had carried for so long was lifted, replaced by a quiet, steady clarity that this was enough. The Asheville house sold faster than anyone had anticipated. The buyers cared little for its history, and I signed the closing documents in a quiet law office, feeling a mixture of relief and lightness. The proceeds were directed to a local women's shelter, named for my Aunt Florence, the woman who had taught me that solitude could be safety, not punishment. Back at the cabin, I moved through my days with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Mornings were spent tending the garden, pulling weeds with bare hands, feeling the earth anchor me in ways I had long forgotten. Afternoons were for journaling, letting words spill onto paper, carrying the soft weight of memories and lessons learned. Evenings I spent by the fire, reading, sipping tea, the cabin warm and still around me. One morning, a postcard arrived, its handwriting careful and uneven. Hi, Grandma. I miss you. Love, Harper. I read it twice before placing it gently on the mantel, a quiet acknowledgement that some threads hold even after separation. I smiled, not with regret, but recognition. Here, in this space of my own making, I was free. The labor, the sacrifice, the silent care, it all remained a part of me. But now it existed on my terms. Peace was not just absence of responsibility. It was presence of choice. And for the first time in decades, I felt wholly, undeniably, myself.